Welcome back to the deep dive. So you sent us a ton of fascinating research, all tackling, well, one of the most fundamental structures in society,
Yeah.
gender.
Yeah, it's a topic that can be pretty dense
Mm.
and definitely emotional.
But so important.
Yeah.
Our mission today is a real deconstruction. We're going to dive deep into the difference between biological sex and socially constructed gender and really try to figure out why that difference matters for everyone.
For every single person, exactly.
Before we even get into the data, let's do that little thought exercise we like. If you, listening right now, just visualize masculine and feminine, what pops into your head?
What words, what roles?
Yeah, what images? You might see some physical traits, things that link to biology, like height or
Yeah.
stature. But you'll also see things like clothes, jobs, expectations, certain attitudes. And the research we looked at makes one point absolutely clear. Those things, the clothes, the job's gender itself, is presented as entirely a social construct, something society just gives meaning and power to.
And that is the starting line. We had to get those definitions clear right away.
Right.
Because confusing sex and gender, that's the source of so much misunderstanding, in the public discourse.
Okay, so let's define the terms. Let's start with sex.
So, sex or biological sex,
Mm.
that's based on tangible, measurable differences. We're talking chromosomes, XX or XY, gonads, tests, or ovaries, hormones like estrogen and testosterone. It's anatomy, physiology.
The biological classification you're assigned at birth?
Exactly. But gender.
Yeah.
That's something else entirely. That's the social identity. It's a set of cultural expectations, the roles, the norms, the behaviors that a society decides are appropriate, usually based on that biological classification.
So biology versus culture. And what about that term social construct? It gets thrown around a lot.
Right. And all it means is that the idea has no inherent meaning outside of, human agreement. A chair is a chair because we all agree on what a chair is.
Okay, that makes sense.
And gender roles are real for the same reason, because we, as a society, agree they are.
Yeah.
And those agreements, they have these profound real-life consequences.
That distinction, biological versus social, that really is the axis that everything else turns on, isn't it?
It is.
So if gender dictates the appropriate roles, where do we see that social control right away? What's the most obvious evidence?
It starts instantly. The moment a child is born, the world acts on them based on their perceived sex. This is what the sources call the immediate imposition of gender.
The blue suit for a boy, the pink blanket for a girl.
That's the classic example.
Yeah.
But it's also the toys they're given, how loud they're allowed to be, the kinds of affection they get. It all starts socializing that child into a predetermined gender role from, day one.
And while society is trying to jam everyone into these two little boxes,
Yeah.
the research is also really clear that identity and expression are just vast. That gender identity, your innermost sense of self and gender expression, how you show that to the world, both exist on this huge spectrum.
Exactly. Thinking of gender as a simple line where you're either male or female is just fundamentally flawed. We see these models, like the genderbread person model, used to illustrate this. It shows identity, expression, biological sex, and attraction all as separate continuums.
Which helps you understand that your identity doesn't have to match your expression, and neither has to strictly match your biological sex.
Right. They're all different things.
And we can see this drive to impose the binary, I think, most clearly in something pretty new, the gender reveal party.
Oh, it's a perfect case study.
It really is.
A case study in a social construct.
Yeah, this trend, it didn't really explode until after 2008. It takes a biological observation sex and turns it into this huge celebratory declaration of a social expectation gender. Pink confetti, blue fireworks.
It's all about putting those social roles on the baby immediately.
And the research points out something fascinating. The woman who actually popularized the whole idea, Jenna Karvinitis, she's expressed deep regret about it.
Really? Because the focus became, in her words, extremely unfortunate. And her own child, whose sex was announced at that first party, now lives outside of typical gender norms.
Wow. So it illustrates the exact point we're making. Biological markers just don't determine who you are.
Not at all. And the societal obsession with everything lining up, that's the real consequence. It leads to this broad social acceptance of cisgender individuals.
People whose biological sex aligns with their gender identity.
Right. And that acceptance often comes at the exclusion or the marginalization of everyone else who doesn't fit that neat mold.
This connects directly to the sociological framework from Judith Lorber, which the sources brought up. She sees gender as more than just a label. It's a system of control.
Lorber gives us three forces at work. First, Gender is a process. It's the daily work of creating social differences between men and women. Second, it's a system of stratification.
So a ranking system.
A ranking system. It structurally ranks men above women and creates inequality. And third, it's a social structure. It's one of the main ways we organize social life. Think about public bathrooms or gendered job expectations.
And the key there really seems to be the stratification part, the ranking.
That's the crucial takeaway. If gender is a system that ranks men above women, what are the daily practical consequences? It means unequal access to power, to resources, to recognition, all of it.
So the constant enforcement of gender, from the colors of baby clothes to adult career paths, it's all maintaining that structural ranking.
Yes. It keeps the system in place.
Okay, that sets up our next pivot perfectly.
Yeah.
Because we have to challenge the premise that underlies that whole structure, the idea that sex itself is simple and binary.
Right.
Our sources identify 4 common and pretty harmful myths about sex and gender that really need to be dismantled.
Okay, what are they?
1, that sex is a single trait. 2, that sex is binary. 3, that your genitals equal your gender. And 4, that gender is just a psychological choice. Let's really hone in on that second one. The myth that sex is binary. We're all taught it's either XX for female or XY for male. Where does biology just tear that simple idea apart?
Well, with all the variations in chromosomes, hormones, and anatomy, scientists are increasingly seeing biological sex itself as a spectrum. It is not just XX or XY.
There are other combinations.
A lot of them. There are chromosomal variations like XXY, which is known as Klinefelter syndrome. Individuals with it are chromosomally neither typically male nor female. And what's interesting is that you need a Y chromosome to divert development from the baseline XX pathway.
So female is kind of the default setting, genetically speaking.
In many ways, yes. And the idea of a spectrum is just made undeniable by the existence of intersex individuals.
People whose bodies have variations in sex characteristics that just don't fit those standard definitions.
And we are not talking about something incredibly rare either. The estimates suggest about 1.5% of the population has a sex variation.
1.5%? What does that translate to?
That's about 2,000 births a year, which is similar to the prevalence of cystic fibrosis. It's not uncommon.
So why isn't this more widely known? It feels like it's often hidden.
It is often intentionally hidden. And that's linked to a really disturbing history of medical intervention and marginalization.
This is the harrowing part of the research.
It is. Historically, infants born with ambiguous genitalia were often subjected to surgery, sometimes immediately, and crucially, without the patient's consent. This was done to, and this is a quote, construct and reconstruct individuals' bodies to fit into the dominant binary sex-gender system.
So forcing a biological reality into a social box.
Exactly. The goal of these surgeries was often just cosmetic, to make sure a child looked typically female if their genital size was smaller than 2.5 centimeters.
And the consequences.
Significant trauma, scar tissue, psychological distress, and sometimes sterilization. It's just a devastating consequence of trying to enforce a two-box system where one simply doesn't exist.
It's incredible. And even the medical tools themselves seem to acknowledge this spectrum. The sources mention something called the Quigley scale.
Yeah, from 1995. It's a visual medical tool, and it's used to map the range of infant genitalia all the way from fully masculinized to fully feminized, which visually confirms that biology is not a simple binary switch. It's a continuum.
Okay, so to really drive home how arbitrary gender roles are separate from biology, let's go back to that social construct idea. The sources use this powerful analogy.
The zombie apocalypse one.
Yeah. If we're sitting in a classroom, a table is for writing on. But if a zombie apocalypse suddenly breaks out, that same table is now a barricade.
Its meaning and its value change completely based on the social context.
And gender roles work the same way. The clothes, the expectations, the jobs, they would all shift instantly in a new context, proving they aren't natural or inherent. They're imposed.
And if they're imposed, that raises the big question. Who decides which roles get to hold all the power?
Which brings us right to power structures. This is where the sources introduce Raewyn Connell's work on hegemonic masculinity.
Right. This is the dominant, idealized form of masculinity in a given society, the one that holds the most social value.
And that ideal is usually tied to what?
Authority, dominance, economic stability, educational success, and historically, heterosexuality. But it's important to remember this ideal is often totally unattainable.
But the pressure to conform is massive.
Immense. Men are pressured to reject anything that's coded as feminine to try and maintain that dominance. And what the sources detail is how alternative masculinities, those practiced by working-class men or men of color or gay men, they have less access to power and resources precisely because they deviate from that hegemonic ideal.
So on the other side of that coin, you have emphasized femininity.
The other side of the power structure, yes. This is that set of traits being nurturing, caring, soft, pretty, thin that represents compliance with the dominant male interests and desires.
So if hegemonic masculinity holds the power, why would women perform emphasized femininity?
Because, as the research suggests, by complying with these expectations, women can gain a sort of limited access to resources and some relative social power. But it's within the existing structure. It's a compliance mechanism.
Which moves us perfectly into this idea of gender as an act. If these are roles, then they have to be performed.
That's Judith Butler's theory of gender performativity.
Yeah.
She argues that gender is, in a way, an illusion. It's only real to the extent that it's constantly performed.
Can you give an example of that?
Think about the intense social coercion around prom or a first date. The pressure to dress and act appropriately for your perceived gender. That pressure, that's the performance in action.
Okay, I see. And this connects to another theory, doing gender.
From West and Zimmerman, yeah. They argue that gender is less about some inherent trait you have and more about what we create and maintain through our daily social interactions. Every single time we act in a gender-conforming way, we're reinforcing that power dynamic for everyone.
And as society slowly starts to catch up to this reality of a spectrum, we're seeing more understanding of identities like non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid.
People who consciously reject those two boxes.
And it becomes crucial, as the research hammers home, to use people's preferred pronouns, they, them, ze, here, because identity is invisible. You cannot tell how someone identifies just by looking at them.
You just can't.
So we've established that gender is this highly arbitrary, rigid structure that's built on a non-binary biological reality. What happens when that rigid structure collides with real life, specifically in a major institution like healthcare?
The result is widespread gender bias and inequality in medicine.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, for instance, studies consistently show women are significantly less listened to by medical professionals. They're more likely to have their chronic pain dismissed as psychological.
And what does that mean for their treatment?
It means they receive less effective pain medication than men. And the research is very, very clear that this bias is compounded for women of color.
But these gender norms, they also deeply harm men.
Oh, absolutely. The societal pressure to embody that hegemonic masculinity, to be strong, resilient, it causes men to delay seeking care, especially for mental health issues.
And this isn't just a theoretical harm, is it? We see it in the statistics.
It's tragic. Suicide rates are highest among middle-aged white men. In 2020, men died by suicide nearly 4 times more often than women. And this is directly linked to that pressure to ignore symptoms and avoid appearing vulnerable.
So what about trans and non-binary individuals? What barriers do they face?
They face this unique and complex set of barriers. Outright bias, economic hurdles, insurance refusing to cover care, staff who aren't trained, a deep fear of discrimination.
The sources mention the diagnosis of gender dysphoria. How does that fit in?
It's complicated. On one hand, it can help medically validate the need for care, but on the other, it problematically frames being trans as a mental disorder instead of simply an identity.
And that control is made even worse by what's called gatekeeping.
Gatekeeping, yeah. Controlling access to care, to information, it disproportionately affects trans people. And the sources cite explicit legislative barriers, the bans on gender-affirming care for minors in states like Alabama and Florida.
So that's the social structure using political power to enforce the gender binary.
Exactly.
Ultimately, the source material just forces us to move beyond looking at gender in a vacuum. We have to take an intersectional approach.
Yes, no identity exists on its own. Your experience of gender is always shaped by your race, your class, your sexual orientation. It's like a Venn diagram where all the circles overlap. You have to address that complexity to find real solutions.
So we started this deep dive with a pretty simple mission: deconstruct the gender binary. And I think the key finding is that both biological sex and social gender are so much less simple than we're taught.
Far less binary.
And that rigid two-box construction of gender is actively maintaining power structures and creating very real harm for anyone who doesn't fit the mold perfectly.
To close this out, let's challenge the very definition of biological sex one last provocative time.
Okay.
The research shares this incredible true story. It's about a 46-year-old pregnant woman in Australia. She has a routine amniocentesis. But the genetic testing revealed something. just astonishing.
What was it?
Her body was a genetic chimera.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning she was built from the cells of two merged embryos.
Rep.
One set of her cells carried XX chromosomes female, and the other set carried XY chromosomes male.
Wait, so part of her body was chromosomally male?
A large part of her physical body, yes.
Yeah.
And she had lived for 4.5 decades without ever knowing. The sources literally call it a science fiction story.
That's unbelievable.
It is. So if society demands that we all fit into one box based on our biology, what exactly would society tell this individual about who she is? Having lived 46 years without knowing her body was literally both. It shows us that biology is often profoundly messier than we assume.
And the meaning we impose on it is entirely a social act.